professor at Northeastern, and I want to talk today in the time that I have about a really what I think is a meaningful mindset that is really needed in today's world, both and thinking. Sometimes we call it paradoxical mindset. How can we apply this mindset that allows us to capture complicated reality, complicated realities, and be able to understand and accept tensions and conflicts? And I'll give you then, so I'll start with kind of a broad approach about what is both and thinking, but then I'll give you an example about an organization that I'm involved in and that Northeastern University is a partner of. How can we implement this set of ideas in the context of Israeli and Palestinian entrepreneurs? And this seems very timely topic. So this is a little bit about my background, coming from the marketing discipline, all my studies in the Hebrew U in Jerusalem, postdoc here in Boston, 2007 at HBS. Then I was a faculty at Ben Gurion University and came here in 2013, 2014. As the cliche said, I just came for a year, and here we are, right? 12 years, 11 years later. Most of my research work is about marketing and social impact. And recently I've been doing research on brand activism. So the intersection of business and politics. What happens when a brand take a stand on controversial socio-political issues? And my second hat is the co-founder of 50/50 Startups, this nonprofit accelerator to bring together Israelis and Palestinians to develop startups together. And I will, again, in my view, it's a manifestation of this paradoxical mindset that I'll talk about. So let's start to talk a little bit. This is the agenda, right? So let's talk about paradoxical mindset or both and thinking first. Then we'll move briefly to talk about um, as a transition phase to talk about diversity, how it is related to what we do, and finally we'll end up with this discussion of 50/50 startups, this accelerator um, that brings together Israelis and Palestinian in the innovation world. So definitely we need their both and thinking. So think about the idea of paradoxes around us, right? We often are encountering conflicts and paradoxes, and they're kind of associated, right? Conflicts and paradoxes. Paradoxes are underlying conflicts. Conflicts are all around us. So we talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but it's all around us in day-to-day decisions, right? Should we eat this ice cream, type or the other one? Should we tell our boss what we think about his decision, or should we not tell him, etc., etc.? So the idea that we can accept and feel comfortable with tensions and opposing perspective, this is hard, and we are not typically born with the ability to do that. This is hard for many of us. There's a few people out there that actually have this skill or attributes that they feel comfortable with tension and conflict, but for most of us this is really hard. And if you think about whenever you come across a paradox or a conflict, immediately we want to adopt a solution or find a solution to the conflict. We do not like to be in a state of conflict, right? And this is what we saw, for example, last year on campuses in the context of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? Many students saw the conflict. Most of them are not necessarily familiar with the details or have a strong opinion, but they saw around them, this notion of, okay, let's support the weak side without knowing all the details, without understanding the complexity. And they see all around them social media buzzing and everybody supporting one side, and it's easy to feel attracted to one pole, to one side, and say, okay, I'm supporting these guys. Again, I don't know much. I don't have a strong opinion, but it seems like a lot of people around me are um, taking a side. I'm taking a side, simplify the story, and in general, people don't like to be in a state of paradox or conflict, and they make choices. So what we often see is that people are attracted to either or type of decision. It's either I stay or I go. It's either I support or I against. It's very difficult to hold a more complex view of reality. And I'll mention that later, but this is a good opportunity to mention again, think about American politics, right? So you don't see a lot today situation where some people will say, you know, I'm a liberal. I like the Democratic Party. But you know, this policy by the Republicans, I can appreciate. I can support. You don't see that much, right? Because immediately as you say, oh, but I like something that the other side have done or is supporting, then you are um, casted as one who supports the other side. You are joining the enemy by, not fully being on board on our side. So the reality in politics, in business, in other domain is that in personal domains, relationships, etc., is that you need to make a choice. You need to be kind of either or rather than both end. And we'll try to talk about how to move to this both end thinking that can be very much useful. Um, so like I said, really, most realities are actually complex, right? They're not black or white. They're not simple. Um, and I gave the example of the American politics, but think about also, even if everyone in the room believed that climate change and climate risk is real and meaningful and we have to take action, super important to take action. Still, there's a lot of paradoxes because we are used to certain quality of living and we used to, we love our car and we fly and, we love, meat and it's part of a tradition to eat in Thanksgiving. So changing behavior, even if we know it's the right thing, if morally we're like, and scientifically and everything, we're fully supporting, the idea of combating climate change and doing the right thing. It's very hard. There's a lot of paradoxes on the way. And of course, with the Israel-Palestinian conflict, such a complex reality that is out there, and most people are not uh, really understanding, what's going on and who should we support. And we need it so badly, this both mind thinking or the ability to handle complex realities because of polarization that makes everything more difficult, right? And this is some data from the World Economic Forum from last year. Basically, they suggest that misinformation, disinformation, and polarization are two of the most challenging social problems we are facing. And of course, the climate is a big issue. In 10 years, they think the climate would be even more important. So, in an environment where polarization is such a huge deal, how can we make people um, feel a little bit more comfortable in a complex situation? So to tackle that, I want to share with you a little bit of resources and then a few kind of thinking tools about this. The best book about this topic has been written a few years ago by Smith and Lewis, Wendy Smith and Marian E. W. Lewis. It's called Both in Thinking, and they really help us to kind of build the case for why it's important and how people that are not born with this very unique ability to capture, to handle complicated realities and conflicts and paradoxes, how to be able to adopt such an approach. Um, the second image in the middle, it's a paper by an Israeli author and a group of other co-authors that shows that if we adopt this mindset. And again, we'll talk in a second how we can think about that and how can we adopt this mindset. But if we adopt this mindset, we are better at problem solving and at creativity. So if you're a manager, if you work in a team with a team, if you work in organizations, adopting this mindset is really useful for you in coming up with new ideas, outside the box ideas. So this is a good thing. And on the right, you could see an op-ed that I wrote in Boston Herald it was last year, how we can apply this notion in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So if would be folks interested, I can share the link later. So how can we think about paradoxical mindset? Here are a few examples that you will find in your work, in your life, in relationships, right? These are happening all the time. So, for example, how in an organization that wants to innovate and um, create new products, bring new habits. How can we move to the future and innovate, but also respect the past and respect tradition? This is also relevant not only for organizations that care about innovation, but also about societies. How can you have this, progressive versus conservative tradition? How can you respect both? People facing today multiple identities or the identities, social identity theory talks about the fact that, we actually hold multiple identities. Maybe it's through gender, or we're parents, or we work in a university, or we love this sports team. So how do you sometimes we have conflicts across the different identities. So how do we manage that? Tension between, again, in organizations, there's a lot of work on this topic in organizations. Organizations that want to be centralized versus decentralized. Um, how in the context also relevant to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or American politics, how can you bring hope but also make it realistic, right? Not too abstract, too unreal. Short-term versus long-term goals, staying here or leaving, right, in a relationship or in a career. So these are all around us. So how do they recommend thinking about this when you come across a conflict or a paradox? Um, the researchers of this area suggest that, first of all, we need to, when we encounter a paradox and we feel uncomfortable, because we will feel uncomfortable, we need to pause for a second and ask ourselves, before very quickly going into either or mode. So pick a side, make a choice. Stop for a second and ask yourself, can I think about this situation not only in an either or terms, but can it be a both and situation, right? So when I'm thinking about hope, can I think about hope that is also anchored in some realism, realistic hope? Can I do that? Or I'm just like hopeful, or I'm just pessimistic. These are the two anchors that people more naturally go into. Yeah, I don't believe it will be, positive. The Middle East is like ruined. There's nothing. It's really bad. Or on the other hand, you're a dreamer. You think about, this is not realistic. So can you create realistic hope, something that combines the two? Or how do you, make progress and innovate, but also respect tradition? Can you do that? Or how do you find a meaningful solution between achieving short-term goals and long-term goals, right? So, for example, for a company to be profitable, but at the same time to be sustainable, can you do both? The traditional, the original, the traditional answer was like, no, I can't do both. It's complicated. We don't do both. We do either or. Now we're trying to train ourselves to think in a more complex way. So when you pause for a second and ask yourself, can I do it differently? Can I think about it differently? Is there value in doing it differently, right? Because sometimes you would argue and you would be correct. Sometimes you need to make a clear choice. Sometimes it is black or white, right? Sometimes it's clear who to support. But most of the time, it's not that clear and it's more complicated. So once you pause and ask yourself, can I even think about it in more complicated terms, in both end terms? The next set of questions would be, what would be some synergies or linkages between the anchors, the either or approaches, and the both and solution. So can I bring something from one side and something from the other that can work together? Can I do that even? Um, and then you start to come up with some answers or solutions. Some of them are called creative integration. So you bring things from one side and the other side and combine them. Or you follow a pattern that it is called consistent inconsistent. So you're not only choosing one side and keep up with it. You can choose one side, but after a while you can change. So it's okay to change and move between sides. I want to give you an example how this comes about in a recent story. I don't know if you heard about, some of you heard about this a new theater, kids theater in Boston called Adam Theater, co-founded by two Israelis. The first show was The Library Lion, and it was in the Boston Library, and it was a fantastic performance. And what's unique about the Adam Theater is that the founder, he really wants to do a special type of kids theater. Because if you think about kids theater, it's typically very simple, right? Kids are very happy with just a few dolls and some action, and like they don't need much. So most kids theaters are like simple, they do not cost much, small spaces, all good. This guy, one of the co-founders, he's the one who comes from the artistic side. He said, we had a conversation. He wanted to meet about something else, but he said, I have a real conflict. I have a real dilemma, and he didn't have in his mind or in his thinking, he didn't have like the both and approach, the paradoxical approach. He just told me, I have a conflict, a real conflict. And the conflict is as follows. I don't want to make the typical type of kids theater. I want to make it like as amazing as possible, with a band and the best actors and the best people to work with on everything around, and the best stage. And this costs a lot of money, very pricey if you want to do it this way. But on the other hand, he tells me, I really want to make this accessible for the greater public, for maybe low income communities and kids. But I can't because this is a really unique artistic endeavor and it's very expensive. I'm not able to offer that, for free or with low prices. And I told him, the way you present this conflict here really makes me think about paradoxical mindsets. What's paradoxical mindset? And I told him, or both end thinking, and I told him, you are portraying two conflicting goals. Can you, or are you able to bring somehow them together and instead of thinking I need to choose either it's a high quality, very costly show, or make it accessible to low income communities, can you do them together? And said, I didn't think about it. I thought I can't. What do you suggest? And then we started to think and brainstorm about this. And I started to ask questions, right? So you start with asking questions. For example, do you have to bring to every show 20 people for your band? Do you have to do all the shows in Boston, in the Boston, old library? Do you have to, and et cetera, a bunch of questions. Do you have to keep the ticket price the same for everyone? And then it helps us realize that if he, at times, takes away from the high quality of the show, and still, overall, the effectiveness of the show, maybe it pays a little quality price, but it's still really good. And on the other hand, you play, for example, with the pricing. And for low-income communities in school, you offer really, amazing discounts. But for people who can afford, maybe you actually ask for a little bit more. Suddenly, you have both end thinking in at play, and you can, achieve some of your goals that you didn't think they were in conflict, and you didn't think you can do it before. Now, again, sometimes you can't do it, but it seems to be a useful way of thinking on conflicts more broadly. Okay, that was kind of the first part where we talked about both in thinking and paradoxical mindset. Um, but before we kind of move to talk about how can we implement this idea with Israelis and Palestinian entrepreneurs, I want to mention one important concept that is at the heart of what we do. And I know in some circles today, we shouldn't be talking about diversity anymore. And if you write a grant about diversity, then this is becoming a problem. But honestly, I mean, diversity is an amazing concept if you think about it. Um, the ability to bring people with different perspectives, this is what we do, and I'll show you with Israelis and Palestinians. But of course, it has a lot of problems. So the benefits are like obvious. You bring people that think differently. It helps with problem solving, creative work, etc. There are a few problems, however, that we are witnessing both from research and practice on diversity. The first is that um, it is bringing a lot of conflict, right? We started with the discussion of conflict. Diverse workforces are often at conflict, right? You have different worldviews, you have different perspectives, you have different backgrounds. Decision making will be more difficult, okay? So definitely more conflicts. And some conflicts are actually good for us, good for the team, good for people. The fact that people are having a good argument about the topic, this is actually good. And we call it task-based conflict. This is great. This is actually where diversity are at its best. The problem is where we move from a task-based conflict to a relationship-based conflict. Suddenly, diversity is turning into I don't like this person, and all these folks are like that, and I don't like working with them, etc. This is one side which is problematic for diversity. Another side which is problematic for diversity over the years, practice have realized that and shown us time and time again that we often stop at what we call surface level diversity, so based on gender or based on race, color, skin, etc. And this is just surface level diversity because people can be people could be the same in terms of surface level diversity, but then they might have very different views or backgrounds. The more meaningful diversity is about actually deep level diversity. It's actually where you have different political views and different value system and different functional backgrounds. And in many cases, recent years diversity has just stopped, focused on, just on um, surface level diversity attributes and have not like fully benefited from the value of diversity. So, okay, we talk about conflict. We talked about diversity in the time that we have. Let me take a clock, a watch, just to see how much we are on time. We're good. I will present to you an example of a group of people, an organization that have tried to manifest this idea, both of diversity and of both and thinking through the world of startups. Okay. and it's called 50/50 Startups, and it's a tech accelerator. Accelerator, for those who are not familiar or not know about this, it's a program. There are many like that in the US, in Israel, in the developed world. They try this program, try to take ideas from entrepreneurs and help them develop the ideas and help them grow. So our unique opportunity here with this organization, 50/50 Startups, is to um, bring Israelis, Palestinians to develop startups together. In fact, we work with three populations, right? So we work with Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, so Palestinian citizens of Israel, and Palestinians mostly from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And we do not see ourselves as a peace organization or as a dialogue organization. We really try to see ourselves as um, economically and professionally driven. So we want to create the infrastructure for people that are very different than one another, right? That rarely meet each other, right? We want to create the infrastructure for them to get to know each other, to build skills, to build trust, and hopefully maybe to create successful business opportunities. We adopted in our accelerator program this logic that comes from the 50s actually. Um, Gordon Alpro was a social psychologist in Harvard, and he studied the civil rights movement and the way one can bring back in the day white and black folks to bring more trust, to trust each other and to get to know each other. It was very hard, of course, back then. Um, what we're doing here is actually following his logic, his philosophy, which is let's follow these kind of four rules or four dimensions of uh, inter intercontact, intergroup contact. Make sure that the people in your group that are very different from one another and they have, stereotypes for one another, etc. Make sure that they feel equal in the program, they have equal status. Make sure they have a common goal. In our case, building a startup, building a team, developing a new idea. Have them work cooperatively around that, and have strong institutional support, which I'll share some insights about. But you have to support them because it's already hard when you are bringing two startup founders from Tel Aviv or from New York or Silicon Valley. It will be obviously more difficult when one is from Ramallah and one is from Tel Aviv. You have to find ways to support them. Um, we see that there are like three main impacts that we see for this type of activity. They first and foremost, and number one priority for this organization is to build trust, right? Then to build skills around business and marketing and finance, etc. Public speaking, leadership, conflict management, and then hopefully economic impact. And we hope to see and we hear anecdotes about indirect effects, right? About from their communities and their families. So this builds kind of a network of hope around those folks. These are our partners. Northeastern University from the get-go was a partner, and I always tell the story that I came to my dean in the business school the first time, 2018, something like that, 2018, 2019. I told him, listen, I'm working on this project, Israelis, Palestinian, entrepreneurs. I want Northeastern to be engaged in some capacity. And to be honest, I was certain that he would say something like, listen, it's complicated. You know, why do we need this? Let me think about it. I'll get back to you. No, from the first minute, it was like Northeastern is in. We have an innovative culture. We have an infrastructure. We have the right people, the faculty to teach. So we developed an academic program that supports with our students and faculty. We support those entrepreneurs, unique entrepreneurs. Um, and part of the program is online, and part of the program they actually come here to Boston. Few words about the program, just to give you a sense. So we recruit entrepreneurs or teams, but most of the time these are individual people that we recruit to the program. We start with building trust, having them meeting each other and realizing, how they can complement each other's skill. Maybe some are engineers and some programmers, some are marketing people, some are communication people, etc. So they get to learn how they can complement each other. They build teams first in Jerusalem, in the Hebrew University, and then to validate the idea, we run the program here at Northeastern and support them. We had this, I need to update. Actually, we had 7 cohorts so far, um, including 2 after October 7, and you probably have questions about that. I'll leave some time to talk about these issues, alumni, supporters. Here are some examples of companies that came out of it. So we are not limiting them to certain topics. They can really develop, we have education technology, we had sustainability, we had um, human resources technology. So a bunch of areas. Um, the most successful recent one is in sustainability, and the other one is in gamifying dating apps, right? So a variety of topics. This is one example of a company that combines AI and human resources processes. So how to better recruit for organizations, and they're a group of Israelis, Palestinian men, women that some of them met in the program, and they brought like outside actors as well. I want to show you a few pictures that give a little bit of hope. So this is from 2024, right? So luckily for us, during October 7, there wasn't a cohort running. Um, and when the dust settled, we were able to regroup and try to see how, if and how we can continue. And the first program after October 7 was actually handled in Cyprus. And it was remarkable to see the people. It was for more advanced startups, and it was remarkable to see the people working together there, breaking bread together, learning together. That was hopeful. And in 2025, we actually we called it a tour of hope. There were 2 women that were able, 2 amazing entrepreneurs that work on this gamified dating app project. One is religious, one is totally secular, one is from Jerusalem, one is from Tel Aviv, and we just went to communities, Microsoft, um, private houses, met just a tour of hope. It brought a lot of you know good energy. That was, and the reason, for example, if you go back, this is like a full house of entrepreneurs, 15 or 20. The fact that we're able to bring only 2 this year to this program in Boston um, is pretty much because the funding that we had from the federal government was just one day was there, and the other day was like poof. And we picked up the phone to call the federal government agency that provided us with the funding to see what's going on. They were all fired, all the people that were there. So that's a story that a lot of organizations in the shared society coexistence space are facing. So this is a current challenge. Um, you would certainly ask about challenges. It's not all smooth sailing, of course. Probably you've heard there are some conflicts in the area. How do we do it? Interesting observation from the 7 cohorts that we have run so far. Um, as I said, we work with 3 communities, so Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, and Palestinians. Um, I can tell you very consistently, whenever there's a big or small cycle of violence, um, the only group, the only group that shows decline in demand for the program are the Israeli Jews. You don't see decline with Israeli Arabs. You don't see decline with the Palestinians. And I think it's reasonable to assume the Israeli Jews, well, they don't really need us, right? I mean, only if they're kind of interested in working in diverse teams and learn about the other side, etc. But they have close to 300 programs like that in Israel, right? They don't really need us. For the Palestinians and for the Israeli Arabs, what we offer is extremely valuable. And they are not putting that away, this opportunity, even if there's huge pressure socially not to be engaged with the other side. They're not giving up, even if there's a war or a conflict. This is pretty remarkable. COVID-19, now who remembers what COVID-19, but it was a remarkable barrier because we could not bring them in person together. Currently, today, we also, people from the West Bank, we cannot bring them to Israel, so it's also a barrier. They need to meet in person to really maximize the ability to build relationships. There's a lot of cultural and skill differences that we see. The Palestinians on the other side that work on technology ideas, extremely passionate, extremely talented, but they do not have the same infrastructure that the top talented Israelis have. So it sometimes create gaps. And that's a challenge, and we need to find ways and different programming ideas to handle that. Um, we see, or ideally, the type of people that we want to recruit to the program are those who really want to be entrepreneurs and find value in diversity and again open-minded to the other side, etc. But first and foremost, they want to be entrepreneurs. But we still attract a lot of people that care about the peace side and sometimes not, we're all for peace, of course, but they have to be economically driven first. In our view, this brings more value to the program. In fact, some of our participants tell us over the years that they joined this program especially because it wasn't, peace or dialogue based. They said we have enough places and enough pain around us. We don't want to hear to be talking about the pain. We want to build good business and use your resources to do that. Um, and the last, challenge that I'll mention is social pressure not to interact with the other side. That again is higher when things are tough. Um, let me stop here to share. I mean, I have another portion with because I'm an academic scholar also. This is my day job basically. So I was really interested in studying, among all these startups that work together in very diverse situations, what characterize the teams that are actually um, make it through the program and continue after the program. So we did a research about that, but it's I want to give some time for folks maybe to ask questions. So if we'll have time, we can go back and I'll briefly say what we found. Let me stop sharing. Yeah. And maybe open it up. And if folks, I mean, I saw maybe there are questions, or how do you suggest, Fallon, we handle it? I mean, I'm open for questions if you have. Um,
Yeah, folks are welcome to, there's like a feature that you can raise your hand. You're welcome to raise your hand, or just unmute and ask your questions. Sometimes people like to write them in the chat also, so feel free to use that. But looks like Jennifer is starting us off.
yeah,
Jennifer,
Jennifer,
feel free to
please.
unmute. I'll ask you to unmute so it makes it easier.
Yes, it wouldn't let me unmute before. Thank you so much. This is incredibly inspiring. I just wanted to really acknowledge the indirect approach. I understand that you're a business owner and you are helping people through the business end of things, and I'm more on the dialogue end of things in my interest. But I'm really impressed, and it's shifted my thinking already in the way you're coming at it indirectly, so that people who are not necessarily seeking this dialogue are getting it in a much gentler way as they work on something else that combines their talents. So I am interested if you show us later what did make this work, and for the groups that maybe weren't able to keep it together after this program, what made things maybe not as successful. So thank you so much for
Yeah.
what you do.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. I would say that when we started, we weren't sure, you know, before COVID and all, should we have a dialogue part or not, or how heavy it should be. And over the years, it became very clear, at least for our kind of segment of the population that are interested in this type of program, that they really don't want to talk about politics. It turns them off, and maybe they have enough of that all around them. Um, and what end up happening, Jennifer, I think, is that if you really, we have teams that really don't want to talk, and they don't talk about politics in their free time, or they just don't. But I think for most teams, what will happen is naturally they will have a conversation, and it's probably better after they work for 2 months or 1 month and they get to know each other and talk about the professional development and value they bring. Then they can talk about the hard stuff. But I think it will then be easier um, for folks to talk about tough stuff rather than in a dialogue situation, which again I totally appreciate, respect the dialogue part. There's a lot of value in that as well. um, but yeah, we attract the people that want an indirect approach, and I'll at the end I'll say a few words about what worked and what didn't work. Yeah, thank you. I see Ellen now, a hand. Ellen, fine.
Yes, I'm just going to echo what Jennifer, I guess, said. And, I'm in the world of food justice and food security, and heard a lovely talk this morning about Leket and all that they're doing in Israel. And I'm kind of going, okay, you're like the entrepreneur person and they're the food people. And I know that there's people within food entrepreneurial work, and then there's places like World Central Kitchen and Leket. And so I'm wondering how this approach can be taken not to support the industrial agricultural food world, but to be supporting the small sustainable, the medium sustainable, permaculture, that kind of thing, and to create these projects similar to what you've done, and yet the focus is on food and maybe growing things for well, I'm also in the hemp world, things like that, to be replacing fossil fuels, which is such a part of this problem.
Yeah. So I would say a lot of the people that join this program, I think, are socially motivated. So not only to get to know the other side, build trust with rivalry, etc. Um, but also to make the world a little bit better. So a lot of the projects are like that: sustainability, water. We have actually a startup that lasted for a year and a half, but then they couldn't make sense of what would be the best business model for them. That was basically a competitor for Leket. They wanted to tackle food waste with a slightly different approach, or to automate some of the Leket approach, which is at least back then it was more manual. Um, so we attract this type of people, but more broadly, I would say this idea of 50-50, I think really can be applied across the world. I mean, if we had endless budget and somebody would say, just, expand, think about how many areas in which there is social diversity and conflict, and bring the folks together. We work with people, for example, in Cyprus, right? I mentioned Cyprus. And we have been hosted at the innovation hub that is based on the buffer between the Turkish side and the Greek side. And you don't think today about Cyprus as like a meaningful conflict, but they hate each other. They hate each other guts. It's unbelievable. It's not violent today, but like they hate each other. So this idea, and they love this, the principle behind the idea. You bring people very different to one another, and you get them through this type of programming or project. They build trust, and then they are more likely to solve big problems, huh? Like that you mentioned. So I hope it's the step in the right direction. Thank you for your question. Aliza, I saw a hand.
Yeah, so I was thinking of something that I wanted to ask, like sort of in terms of the social dynamics between the two different cultures I want to ask you about. Because in my own experience, I had a interesting situation where I was working with a supervisor of mine who's Moroccan Arab and Muslim, and initially I was like pretty scared to talk with her about these sort of hard topics and these hard things, this dialogue, and
Mm,
then once we did, we actually found that we agreed on a lot more than I initially expected, and we
mm,
became kind of closer friends, and it was really nice. And then after that, our dynamic became more of the sum the dynamic was greater than the sum of its parts, which was, I think, really, really nice for me. And I was wondering if you've seen any of those kind of stories come out of your work and what kind of unique strengths can come out of Israeli and Palestinian cooperation.
um, so I think, as I said, we try not to position this as a kind of a peace building initiative, but indirectly, we hopefully, of course, to bring the people together. So once there is a leadership that's able to have a conversation, the people behind this leadership would be more comfortable with one another. Um, so some of the positive things is that we see people that are graduating from the program and they have a DNA for open-mindedness, right? So one story was that one team separated ways, but one of the Jewish founders went back to us and said, I could have picked one of 300 other, accelerator programs, but I picked you for the reason you're there. Can you help me find another, Palestinian co-founder? So for the future, people who grew up in this or graduated from the program will have this open mindedness. We see friendships that are formed socially, um, and a few business successes, right? So it's still not huge. We still on the economic side, we still need to show for it, but hopefully over time. So I hope, first, social impact, then the skills, of course, whether they continue to work on startups or move to work on, something else, they get a lot of skills. So these are the type of, hopefully some of them small scale impact, but then maybe some larger. Thank you. I see Robert has a hand and then Dov.
Congratulations on your program. It's very, as others have said, very inspiring. I was interested in what you said that when there's a exogenous event of conflict, that the Israelis are the first to leave because they have other options through accelerator programs. Uh, I'm interested in a couple of questions. One is, given that there are already, even without conflict, other programs, why do you find that what's bringing the Israelis in the first instance, and then and even when there is conflict, are you finding that people who are Israelis, some of them were saying, well, you know what, there's this whole talent pool that's, among Palestinians that we're just writing off, that by not, that can really help us grow as a country and all that. And it also made me think of, I'd been reading some interviews with Ben Gurion from way back in the day. He had done. There's a book called Ben Gurion Looks Back, but it's really a transcript of a series of interviews that were done with him. And one of the things that he pointed out is, listen, we've reached out to Arab nations to try to bring some of our technology to them and work with them, and they weren't responsive. Without getting into what the history is it was an accurate portrayal or not, but I'm thinking about, you're building these economic incentives, it seems to me, these opportunity incentives for people to actually get along, rather than starting with, why don't we all just get along, which is all kind of warm and fuzzy. You're actually creating this economic incentive for which a spin-off, to use another economic term, is people are going to get along, because you have to get along if you're going to succeed economically. There's a lot there, but I wonder if you could kind of bring that together.
So briefly, because of time, and I'll leave my email later if folks want to be in touch. First of all, on the Israeli side, I would say, I think we see two groups. One that are more really coming from a peace, open-mindedness side, right? They really don't have many opportunities to meet Palestinians, right? So this is, and in a business context, rarely. So this is intriguing, and I think the second advantage is the Boston connection, right? I mean, you have 300 accelerators, but one or two are international, in flavor, right? So yeah, they like it. They like it a lot. I won't deny. And to your other question, yes, this is a huge opportunity, and I think it's becoming even more meaningful with the Abraham Accords and the connection with the Gulf countries. We had over the years a lot of opportunities to start think about how we bring, Moroccans or the Bahraini to the table. And at times, the Palestinians were like, our board member Palestinians didn't like the idea. They kind of takes away a little bit. But overall, I think we're moving in that direction of thinking more globally, regionally, rather than, just focusing on our side of the story. But yeah, a lot of opportunities. I agree. Imagine a startup that can sell now to the Arab world because of that. That it was, so huge opportunities. I agree. I see the time. Dov, maybe a last question. Thank you, Robert, and I'll leave my email just in case people want to. Yes, Dov, I'm with you.
Thank you. I've thought of this idea before. We started a nonprofit in one of the poorest countries in the world, where we're taking children who live in the street and we're transforming their lives. And it's only 3 years old. And I've been involved in an Jewish American Palestinian American group at one point that worked with the State Department to try to encourage this two-state solution, blah, blah, blah. But it's a very practical question. We would like to bring a Palestinian or several Palestinian people and Israeli Jews together to just a very similar idea, not peace building, but of course peace building indirectly, and together that it would be interested in, like social workers or psychologists that would be interested in work of transforming the very vulnerable children. The practical question, in our interest of time, is how do I locate people? What organizations do I go through that would be candidates to do this? Maybe graduate schools of education. I just don't know. But I've thought of this for like almost from the inception of our program.
So I put my email on the chat bot, the chat box. Let's chat, and we can brainstorm. We need to think about this more. But these are difficult times for relocations, to get the permits to move from one place to another. But it's still doable for Palestinians to go out of Jordan. I mean, it's still a possibility, like we did in Cyprus. So it's doable, but it's slightly more difficult today. But thank you. Let's continue the conversation. I'm happy to. So thank you for the opportunity to present today, and thank you for your kind feedback. Feel free to reach out if you want to continue the conversation. And
You
you have
have
almost,
your email?
yeah, in the chat, if you can see the last comment, a.grinstein@neu.
Professor, this was fabulous. I really appreciate it.